We have David Hansen, CEO, Australian eHealth Research Centre of CSIRO, Associate Professor Xiao Lu, Senior Clinician-Scientist in AI and Digital Health at the University of Birmingham, Professor Melissa McCradden, AI Director, Women's and Children's Health Network, and the Hospital Research Foundation Clinical Research Fellow in AI Ethics and AML, and Professor Rajvinder Singh, Professor of Medicine, the University of Adelaide, and Director of Gastroenterology, Lyell McEwin Hospital. Thank you. And just for, if you felt that I didn't answer any of your questions adequately, we now have 4 very clever people on the stage, so you can ask the same question again. I'm going to have some prepared questions for them, but actually we really did want to make sure we have time for this to be a general discussion, and so we'll touch on a few areas first, and then we'll open it up. If, however, you feel that you are so excited about a particular response that you need to kind of interrupt the flow there and then, please do wave, and we do have people with microphones around the place. So, welcome, and thank you. So, Raj, if we can start with you, what are the most promising areas where you believe that AI could significantly impact clinicians today? What are you looking forward to AI doing?
Thanks, Alastair. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you for that excellent talk. So that was really fantastic. I'm going to put on my clinician hat here. I'm mostly 95% of the time a clinician, and mostly looking at, I suppose, for want of a better word, the bottom end of things with a colonoscopy. As a gastroenterologist, one of the biggest things which we look at is colorectal cancer screening. So hopefully this can correlate with your various specialties. So in our experience in the country of about 26 million, we do about 1 million colonoscopies a year, out of which about 2/3 of them are basically done for looking at polyps. And AI has come into the fray because it has mostly superseded the proceduralists in detecting polyps. So polyps is a precursor for cancer, and on an average, we would probably find about 50% of the colonoscopies which we perform would find some form of a polyp, either a small polyp or a large polyp, and that demands removal. But half of those polyps are benign, so they may not need to be removed as well. So AI has come into the fray to sort of help the proceduralists detect polyps. At the same time, there have been some sort of value in characterizing these polyps, telling us what these polyps are. It has more or less, the technology has come in without, I think, much clinical oversight, and it's been marketed now with some devices. The corollary to things is that with a detection of an adenoma or adenoma detection rate, which again is a precursor of a cancer, we've got a baseline value for all colonoscopies that we have to sort of reach a target of 25% in the country. Now with AI, various studies and systematic reviews have shown that that can improve by about 12 to 15%. So with 1% increase in an ADR or adenoma detection rate, the actual cancer detection rate increases by about 3%. So for instance, if I have an ADR of 50 or 60%, I'm considered great. But AI can further improve that by 10 to 15% in the low adenoma detection rate proceduralists, but not much of the high ADR proceduralists, because not each procedure is made the same. So AI has come into fray. In the country now, we've got about maybe 3 or 4 companies sort of marketing this, but with an additional increased cost in the device itself. So it helps and it works together with the proceduralist. But at the same time, the risk with that is that it is not fully trained with all of the polyps out there. It's quite preliminary, and sometimes it makes mistakes. There's a very high false positive rate, so lots of boxes come about when we're doing a procedure, and by the end of the day, 4 or 5 p.m., you're tired, you're dreaming about boxes when you go to sleep, and people tend to switch them off. Mm-hmm. That's one sort of downside. The other downside is the false negative rate. So it can pick up polyps, but it may also miss certain abnormal polyps or abnormal protrusions or things like cancers, which are not very common. So there's quite a high false positive rate and quite a high false negative rate as well. But somehow it's made its way into the market, and people are using it or purchasing it. So that is one of the downsides of the actual device. And I think the issue is with the training itself. It has been trained on a subset of polyps worldwide, perhaps in maybe a few centers around the world, and it doesn't cover the breadth of the different sort of pathologies which are encountered in the colon. So that's just an example. How can it really help? It can help with other things. It can help with keeping quality with the procedure itself. It enables us to sort of assess whether the procedure itself is complete and whether something called a bowel preparation score is good, and that keeps quality of the procedure intact. There's also a lot of things coming about with regards to Gen AI and what's called as ambient AI. So one of the banes of colonoscopists like us is that we have to write a report which sometimes is quite tedious, but somehow there's this mechanism at play now that it can record what you say during the procedure and generate a report towards the end of a procedure automatically with voice recognition as well as visualization of what was occurring. It's almost like a big brother thing within the procedure itself. So a lot of very novel and new sort of ways of looking at things. But I think, to come to a question which we discussed earlier, I think it's not AI trumps the clinician or the clinician trumps AI. I think it should be a partnership where we work together.
Thanks, Raj. So, David, you sit in a different place within the ecosystem, so I'd be really interested what you see are the kind of opportunities, what you...
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Alastair. And I will take panel's prerogative at some point and ask you some questions, but I'll start off by answering yours. So look, I lead CSIRO's Digital Health Research Program, the Australian eHealth Research Centre, and so we are a research centre. And really we've got two big areas of focus, one around connected care, including interoperability and other issues related to digital health. And then right across our program, we use AI, and we've been using AI for as long as we've been going, which is about 20 years. And that's dealing with all sorts of health data, whether it's genomic data or imaging data, into the data collected in health records and pathology reports and all that sort of thing, natural language processing, all these AI technologies which I'm going to call, actually I don't know what I'll call, just the standard AI technologies that we've known about and which have been developed over the last 70 years. And I think over that time, we've spent a lot of time working with our health partners, whether it's in Queensland Health or around Australia, or with our clinical research partners in areas like Alzheimer's disease and cerebral palsy and others, where we've been involved in collecting the data and the imaging and building AI algorithms to extract information out of all that data. And I think over that time we've learned to not necessarily play down the role of AI, but certainly not go into detail with clinicians and executives because eyes tend to glaze over, etc. And so what's been really interesting, I think over the last 18 months or 2 years since ChatGPT's kind of burst onto the scene, is that all of a sudden we've had and clinicians are very clever people, and they play with things, right? And so all of a sudden we've had clinicians and people in health services playing with ChatGPT or other generative AI technologies, building a little application, going, actually, this is great. This could save me X time, or improve the way we do this. And they're actually coming to us and saying, actually, we want to use this AI thing you've been mentioning for the last 20 years, which is really exciting because we actually all of a sudden can have different conversations about how the system and the clinicians and health services want to use AI to improve everything from patient outcomes across to running the system. And so I think that's where we're starting to see some of the kind of low-hanging fruit. Raj mentioned ambient AI. We're starting to see the ambient AI being introduced into GP health record systems, and they'll listen to the conversation. Hopefully that does free up the clinician to talk more with the patient rather than just filling out forms or filling out the health record and then putting the data into the health record. So of course, that sounds great, probably is great for that patient clinician interaction, but that's an area where it's not necessarily lots of complex AI, but we do need to make sure that's safe and the data being captured is correct. And then imaging is, I think, the other low-hanging fruit, if for no other reason that images are probably one of the areas where we have done a lot of AI over the last 50 years. So there's been large collections of imaging. We've already got really mature technologies for analysing those images, mature AI, and so going through the sort of process which Alastair talked about in bringing it into the clinic, and making sure that the training data is separate from the test data, and then that ongoing monitoring. And we have regulatory, a regulatory pathway for those tools as well, and whether that's mammography through to endoscopy, there's lots of work being done, and is probably the other low-hanging fruit. But of course, then there's lots between there where I also think we're starting to see AI being used, and so I'll finish there.
No, thanks, David. So, Melissa, we've a number of examples there between Raj and David where people starting to use it and maybe very excited about its potential. But what does responsible integration look like into our health system?
Yeah.
In under an hour, It's like
yeah, I'll try to be quick.
Yeah, no.
Something that you said on the panel was really reassuring for me to hear, because it's something that I say a lot as well, which is we know how to do this. Yeah. So if you're working in a hospital, if you have an MRI scanner, if you have your EHR system, if you have drugs that you deliver to patients, any kind of thing that we have within health systems, there's a person who's checking that scanner to make sure it's functional. There's a person whose job it is to maintain records on the performance of some of these devices. We have whole systems and committees that devote themselves to things like that. And all of that is spelled out in the National Safety and Health Quality Standards, which is something that, since I've been coming here, I've looked increasingly to these standards. So even as we navigate things like clinical trials and setting out the practices that we need to have in place in order to maintain what we need to do, because we're accountable to those standards as health institutions, we can look at that just the way that we've looked at other regulatory structures to say, what are the things that we currently do well? What are the practices that we've established to check for things like safety and efficacy, and how might we apply that here? So if you look at the national standards, it spells out quite a lot of this. Standard 1 is on clinical efficacy and safety and monitoring and evidence. All of these things are set out there. So as an institution, given that you already know how to engage some of these practices, how to go about meeting our accountabilities under those standards, what we can do is move toward doing that now with AI as well. One of the other things that actually you didn't mention in how the reporting guidelines are used is with respect to HREX. So we had a comment about HREX before. One of the ways that we can have embed some of these principles of responsible AI is not only by using those standards to set out a very high level of quality in the applications to the HREC board, but we're also benefiting the people who are applying, because those researchers now at the very first stage of doing their project, they're now well set up to publish in a journal like Nature or JAMA or what have you. And so there's a benefit not just to the health system, not just to the HREC, who now has a clear set of metrics that they want to look at when they're engaging in ethical oversight, but the researchers also are setting themselves up for benefit. And then we also can't not talk about engagement with Aboriginal partners being here in Australia, and so that's one of the key issues for me in my role. Partnering with the Aboriginal Health Unit at Women's and Children's has been an absolutely incredible partnership, and working with them, learning from them, and having their wisdom help guide me in terms of developing some of these processes. I think this is something that there's not a lot of countries where we do this at an extremely high level. I think there's a couple notable exceptions, but we're continually striving toward moving toward that better partnership. And I think we can't talk about responsible AI without bringing in that equity component and looking at the people who are most likely to be disadvantaged and making sure that they have a strong voice as we talk about what constitutes responsible AI.
So I want to go to Xiao in a moment to ask more about the kind of the data set building and in relation to bias. But I know you're a proud Adelaide resident, but you don't sound like you're from this part of the world. So where have you also been practicing, and have you noticed any differences, or is everything the same?
Yeah, I'm from way up there in Canada, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I came here from the Hospital for Sick Children. And that is the place where we did a lot of work in terms of advancing the ethics oversight through the research ethics pathway. And really we found that was something where I actually remember around the time when Spirit and Concert was starting, I remember people were telling me, why are you going to this? No one's going to do a clinical trial with AI.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, we now have hundreds of trials going on. And I think, again, it has to do with that issue that you mentioned about, we're scientists. We know how to do science. This is a new tool. It's a new type of method. It's a new approach, but we know how to do science. And so my work in Canada was really about, advancing this through a research ethics pathway. And so that's a lot of the engagement that I've been doing here. I do think that Canada, at least where I was specifically in Toronto, sometimes Toronto is so big that you don't meet enough people and you can't have as good partnerships. Like we had an EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion group in Toronto. We didn't have a single staff member who was First Nations. So we weren't able to do a lot of the work that we should have been doing. So I'm very, very fortunate to be here, where there is such a strong ecosystem in Aboriginal scientists, consumers, scholars, and knowledge holders. So I think Australia has a lot of things going good for it.
Thanks, Melissa. So, Xiao, so if we want to solve the problems of algorithmic bias and bias in AI systems, do we need to just build bigger data sets?
Good one.
I know you'll have to be asked this. Yeah.
Yeah, algorithmic bias is a very real and very serious problem that it should be assumed that all algorithms will be biased in some way if it's trained on data that is representative of our world, because our world is somewhat biased in different ways. But Alastair showed a really nice slide from a paper called Ethical Machine Learning in Health earlier on, which showed all the different stages of AI development and deployment where there are opportunities for bias to creep in. And often that conversation leads us to, we have imperfect data, it's not representative enough, we just need bigger data sets. And so that drives efforts to make bigger and bigger and bigger data sets. And that is part of the problem, but it is really a multifaceted issue. So if we just concentrate on the data part, yes, we often don't have representative data sets because data is sampled. But even in the scenario where we do have data that is perfectly representative of what is happening in our health systems, we know that our health systems have inequitable care. We know that we have human biases. We have unequal access to care. And so even in the perfectly representative data set, we should still expect those biases to exist. And algorithms are just really powerful machines for learning patterns. And so any patterns that exist in our data sets will be reflected in the algorithm too. So it's not just about quantity of data, it's also about understanding what's within that data and understanding what types of biases might exist. And sometimes the solutions to overcoming that algorithmic bias is not so much of a technical fix, but it's about understanding it well enough that we can then find other ways to mitigate how it might translate to health inequalities. So we definitely encourage taking more of a zoomed out approach about the effects of bias rather than just trying to fix it on a technical level.
Thanks, Xiao. Something, I'm just giving you a heads up because one of the things that came up was that around generative AI. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts, whether there's any guiding principles to help people, not what's the answer, but what are the guiding principles that maybe people should be thinking about as they confront what feels like quite a new, pervasive technology. But I'll just come back to you. But Melissa, first of all, with you, we generated some ChatGPT sort of dummy bios for the panel, and you challenged us on this. So do you want to tell everybody why you thought that there was an issue here that we should take seriously?
Yeah, this is it's a big question, and I hope that I can kind of leave folks with a couple key messages here. But one of the issues is that specifically ChatGPT, there's almost nothing ethically defensible in how it was developed. That's kind of unquestioned. And if you look this up, you'll find a lot of reporting, really excellent journalistic reporting on this issue. And so I think there's a lot of questions about which technologies we're promoting. So for example, when you're in a medical meeting, we don't say specific brand names of individual drugs. We don't promote one brand over another. And we try to be more objective in that way. So I think that when we're naming specific tools, maybe we can think about some of the principles that we apply to that. But one of the main things that I want to highlight is the environmental impact, particularly in this forum where we've got some excellent presenters later on speaking about environmental impacts and health systems and how we're implicated. And while people will debate what the figures are specifically, it is unquestionable that to make a single query to ChatGPT takes monumentally greater energy and water consumption than for a traditional search, whether you're using DuckDuckGo, Google search, or any of the others. And so this is a huge issue. We see that we are reinvigorating the fossil fuel industry, reviving places like 3 Mile Island, investing in nuclear power. All of the companies that were moving toward their net zero policies like Microsoft and Google, they've now kind of said, okay. Not going to go for it anymore. Don't worry about it. And so I really worry that we are moving in quite a negative direction with this. And so it's hard to see, right? Because we think about the internet as sort of this invisible entity, and you type something in and you don't see the impact. Whereas I can tell you, I tell my kids to turn off the lights when they leave a room, not just because, yes, it's bad for the environment to leave the lights on, but also I get the energy bill. Yeah. We don't see the energy bill from what we're using this for. So I think that the way to think about this is what is the value add? So if you think about something like what Raj was talking about, the ability to generate notes so that a physician can speak face-to-face with a patient, reduce some of that administrative burden that we know is burdening clinicians, that's a big benefit. That might be very high value versus using it for entertainment, using it when a very simple search will do, using it when I can kind of send something very quickly. I think we really need to be thinking about what the value is specifically, whether this is the right tool that we need to achieve that value in order for us to be responsible stewards of the environment for future generations.
Brilliant. Xiao, if hypothetically you had an ethically generated large language model, okay, general purpose large language model, and it was shown to be sustainable, so hypothetically, okay, some future states where we'd dealt with Melissa's concerns, what are the remaining concerns or issues that people in the room should be thinking about in the application towards healthcare?
Yeah, I think there's so many different challenges with LLMs. It's not even, it's difficult even to start. But I guess areas that we haven't touched on yet is one, like how do we evaluate this technology in a health context? And once we figure that out, how does that then now fit into the regulatory paradigm? So right now, we don't have any large language models that are cleared for as AI as medical device. So the sort of 900 odd, maybe I think it's over 1,000 now number for the FDA approved devices. None of them are large language model based. That doesn't mean none of them carry out a medical purpose and aren't on the market. They're just dubbed general purpose. And within that general purpose bracket, if that includes medical purpose, well, that's just kind of like one aspect of being general. It's a bit like if we were all general purpose physicians that happen to carry out medical functions too. And so it's been a kind of like an ongoing discussion about how should we comprehensively and systematically evaluate these models for medical purposes. And the best that our community have come up with so far is we look at it, its response to a number of prompts. So sometimes that's MCQs, sometimes that's things like USMLE questions, sometimes they're clinical vignettes. And then we get a panel of experts together and we look across a number of different aspects. So for example, is it accurate? Is it comprehensive? Is the response factually based? Is it free of bias? But this is a massive evaluation effort, which often doesn't generate sufficient power to be able to pick up those safety signals in the first place, especially when these large language models have a tendency to give you different answers even when you ask it the same question multiple times. And so the evaluation approach that we have as a community for these language models is really limited right now and very imperfect. So there's still loads of questions that I think are unanswered with LLMs, and there's kind of almost once you step back enough, almost a philosophical debate as to whether they should be just general purpose, somewhat self-regulated by users and the user behavior, and the way that we learn to know what Google search is for and what it's not good for example. Versus being regulated in the same way that we do other medical devices, and I don't have the answer.
But thank you. It's really helpful to hear some of the kind of principles around this, because these are really all-pervasive tools. Unlike some of the technologies, perhaps I was talking about earlier, where that comes through a clear pathway, and we're trying to refine the pathway. As Melissa and Xiao pointed out, these, in fact, all the panel pointed out, these are kind of here amongst us. So key questions for us to consider. David, in fact, I'll ask all the panel this, and then we'll open up to all of you. But David, what do you see as the major challenges to sort of unlock the potential of AI? So you talked very eloquently about some of the different areas you're seeing it in and you're excited about. But what are the challenges?
So, look, we've already heard about a number of the challenges, and Melissa's discussion there of the environmental impact is fabulous. So thank you for that, because I don't think anyone realises the impact of these models. The kind of what we're starting to see with the large language models, and I agree with you also with what you were saying, but what we are starting to see is some of them be a little more open source, the Llama one from Meta, etc. And we're starting to see those being used as foundational models to then train additional data and constrain how the kind of foundational model is used to answer a specific question, and so, or to generate a specific thing, radiology reports. So, we're using a foundational model, and then to additionally train on radiology reports, and then only generate radiology reports, and that seems to be a way where we can constrain and get better answer or accurate and reliable results out of the AI algorithm. So I think one of the challenges is taking advantage of the fact that we're seeing these foundational models being made available. But as always, and I think you did an excellent job, Alastair, in the different phases from design through to implementation, getting through that pathway to implementation where the end user and the end user's patient are both cognizant of both the limitations of the technology and comfortable with it being used. I think the question about wanting a human to view the image, again, Alastair talked about we need a sustainable healthcare system, and there's no doubt that AI is going to play a role in reducing the burden on an overstretched workforce as it is. So I think getting through to there is one of the challenges, and I'll take the opportunity to ask my question to Alastair, which is that we don't really have, and maybe someone will disagree with me, we don't really have in Australia a kind of national effort around AI in healthcare. I've been working with Enrico Corriera around the Australian Alliance for AI in Healthcare, and we've published a roadmap. The Department of Health is doing a consultation around safe and reliable AI at the moment. A number of people here have been involved with Enrico and I on that. The UK invested a number of years ago a significant amount of money in the NHS AI lab. I seem to remember over £1 billion, but you might want to correct me.
$250 million, 250 million.
Okay, but still a lot of money, it seems to me. And is that are you seeing a coordinated approach, and how does some of your work plug into that NHS, and is that helping with that implementation at the end? Sorry to ask.
No, that's great. So, Xiao, what's the answer to David's question?
That's really dangerous to ask me to comment on the investment by the AI lab. So I think we do have somewhat of a joint-up approach, which is great, and we've worked very closely with the major stakeholders across that ecosystem. So the UK government just set up a centralised body called the NHS AI Lab that had a number of programs funding multi-centre evaluations of products that are quite mature and on the market, data curation efforts, and an ethics program as well, which actually funded Standing Together. And I think, we spent a lot of time in these rooms trying to get the different stakeholders that already existed within the system to kind of figure out what their role is. That sounds very patronizing for some very well-established institutions, but a bit like the kind of alchemy thing, people seem to lose their minds whenever AI comes into the picture. And so trying to figure out, what is the role of the regulator? At which point of the evaluation process are they most crucial? And then what exchange of information then goes to a NICE or health commissioner, and what is their unique focus going to be around value and cost effectiveness? And then and now we're increasingly working more on the implementation side, so bodies like the CQC that look more at quality of care provided by the health service that are going to have a very crucial role in ongoing monitoring and so on. So I've kind of forgotten what the question was, but but just to say that I think we do have these stakeholders within the system that already have very clearly defined roles, and we try and help them figure out where in the evaluation process they are most useful. Which bit of the question did I miss?
Yeah. Thanks, Xiao. No, I think and it comes back to Melissa's point that we kind of know how to do this. We have systems in place, and so again, I think something that we've tried to do is inform and refine the system to be AI ready, rather than saying, oh, AI is shiny and new, we must build everything new for it. Because actually, if you try and build a entirely new evaluation regulatory system, governance system that sits outside our existing systems, it's a recipe for chaos, including working actually when is something AI in this box or not AI and in that box. So thanks, Joe.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yep.
I think one of the things that we've not done so well in the UK, and maybe this is helpful lessons learned, is that we've had a heavy emphasis on investment in the technologies and the companies and for each of them to be generating evidence, but much less investment in system readiness in terms of the hospitals and the institutions. That last slide that Alastair showed in terms of AI readiness around building in-house capabilities to integrate, to monitor, to have staff that are confident in doing the due diligence and fact-checking and ongoing monitoring. And so what we've then ended up with is a lot of products lined up at the front door with really nice PowerPoint slides that always look convincing, but then buyers that aren't confident enough to look across 5 products and go, this one suits us best. And we're confident that we can check that it's safe, and we're confident that in the next year, 2, 3 years, we can continue to do that. So that is one area where I would love to see the AI lab invest in the next couple of years, and I think that is what their focus is on now.
Yeah, and in fact, Melissa, do come in, but also I think it'd be great if you could unpack a bit more about the translational trial and the role of that, because I skimmed over that, but I think that's a really valuable tool for people to be aware of.
And I think one of the barriers that we've also kind of set up is something that we put ourselves in this position by setting up this dichotomy of AI versus clinicians, and by proposing that AI solves all of these problems, you've also put yourself in a situation where if you're a healthcare system looking at some of these solutions, you kind of want it to be magic and you want it to be perfect. And then when it's not, you're sort of like, oh, well, we're not going to adopt it. But that was never the choice that we should have had to be making. It was, how do you get the most out of what the system can do? And how do you complement that with what we're the best at, which is providing good care? Part of the reason that, I speak with youth a lot, as you know, about AI. And so these are people who, they love technology. Like, they're very pro-technology. But they also say, like an AI tool does not care if I'm missing my friend's party because I'm stuck in the hospital. An AI tool does not care if I might, miss out on going to, something that's really important, if I might get a false positive. But the person cares. The person cares about me. And so when they talk about things like guardrails or safeguards on AI, I think that we've done ourselves a disservice by not empowering our clinicians with the idea that their knowledge also matters. Their knowledge, their connection with the patient also matters. Because you can imagine we could have a perfectly great performing technology, that's all wonderful, but we know people have challenges and barriers to adopting good health advice all the time. One of the primary things that makes them actually more likely to do it is that they like their doctor. If you like your doctor, you're more likely to adopt positive health behaviors. And so I think, again, like, we've sort of set ourselves up for failure in that way by so heavily focusing on what does the technology need to look like, how do we test it, how do we measure it, without also looking at how do we empower our clinicians to use it in the right way. Just one final anecdote, because you mentioned the Obermeyer paper, and I always have to point this out. In the Obermeyer paper, this was the one used across the United States where it was systematically biased against Black patients. One of the tests that the researchers did was that they looked at the algorithmic decisions about how many patients were referred to care from each group, and they looked at what the doctors did. The doctors referred more Black patients than the algorithm would have into care. They were redressing some of the aspects of algorithmic bias that were present in the system, and they did that out of the best interests of their patients, knowing that some patients have more difficult access. And so we're empowering clinicians to make those more equity-focused decisions that aren't sort of a matter of actuarial accuracy, but are more focused on how to help that patient, I think is the kind of key complement to using these technologies in a responsible way.
Cool. So Raj and David, and then let's back to you about translational trials, if you're...
Oh, sorry.
But we'll go because I think Raj and David want to come in on your point. So, Raj?
I'd like to sort of take that cue from what you said. So I think there's always been a competition between AI and the clinician, and that should actually turn out to be a partnership rather than a competition. The issue sometimes we clinicians face these days is that the algorithms which come about has been already pre-decided. So there's this black box of sort of understanding which nobody clearly understands, and they're very market-driven. So a clinician may use an AI system. As I said, there are about 3 or 4 available for colonoscopy in the country, and not really understand how it's come to that deduction. And the risk which we run sometimes with these sort of systems is that we also train our junior doctors. They are in training now, and they are being exposed to all of these technologies, and they really can't make out what is the truth and what is not the truth. And that is actually a diagnostic risk to the patient, a clinical risk to the patient. And there are times as well when the proceduralist, so I'm talking quite clinical here, the proceduralist relies on the AI system itself and switches off, hoping that the AI system picks up all of these polyps on the way out of the bowel. That's when we start examining things and basically rely totally on the AI system and not on their clinical judgment or their visualization or how they're handling the tool itself. So that, I feel, is a very clear risk that technology and AI itself is superseding the clinician, in our specialty at least, and basically making decisions for the clinician. And I think that is a real risk. And that's one of the problems which I think, one of the challenges which we have to now try to incorporate, not only good ethical practice and biases, but also how to train the next generation to use AI responsibly. So that's one big issue. The other thing is that with regards to, I think, the cost, like 250 million, that's great, but who's going to pay for this sort of AI devices to come in? And what is actually the true benefit? So those are sort of things which keeps playing in our minds.
Thank you. David, did you want to come? Okay. Melissa, a couple of minutes on translational trials, and then we'll open it up as promised. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I thought you asked about translation broadly.
Okay. No.
So translational trials, this is a concept that actually really got me interested way back when I started. And this was based on a number of experiences across US and Canadian healthcare systems where people were observing that the very same algorithm at the hospital across the street with the same patient population, same EHR system, it failed. It would work well at one site, fail at another. And so I think one of the things that is very, very apparent now, and as you said in your presentation, just because it works in one place doesn't mean that it's going to work in another. And there's some variability with this. So I think imaging is one of the areas where there's more generalizability that can be preserved, because maybe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a polyp might look fairly similar. There might be differences based on the type of scanner or the type of equipment you're using. There might be some differences in patients. But when we're looking at things like predicting readiness for discharge, or looking at patterns of hospital-acquired infections or patterns of sepsis presentation, these can be driven by contextual local factors to varying degrees. And so that's also why I think the relevance of the health standards is so important, because it's very clear that even with, a regulatory approved product, you need some means of locally making sure that the performance is there, and also that it's connected to the right outcomes for your patient population and what you're looking to make in terms of gains.
Brilliant. Okay, so thanks to the panel for all your thoughts so far. And now we're open to questions. So I saw John, and then we'll take it from there. So. And you'll be pleased to know that after tea, we have another panel also on data science in the context of research excellence. So looking forward to that very much. John.
Thanks. Great stuff. The exciting bit, if you like, and the thing that medical students, for example, get all excited about is making the diagnosis. But of course, medicine and healthcare is a lot more than that, and good clinicians have the capacity to review their diagnosis continually. And also the other part of good healthcare is actually looking for appropriate response to intervention. So a simple thing might be a skin infection, you make the diagnosis, you start antibiotics. If it doesn't go away, then you should be reviewing that either the diagnosis or the antibiotic use, for example. It's a very simplistic answer. I'm concerned that all of the AI efforts are around that sexy bit of diagnosis with not enough focus on the complicated bit, which is so crucial for good outcomes, which is the patient taking the tablets? Have they turned up for surgery? Is it the right surgery? Have they responded appropriately to the intervention? Are they getting sicker? Because the AI system has turned off because it's made the diagnosis and has forgotten about what's going on next. It's not exciting, it's not, it doesn't appeal, I'm sure, to the engineers in the same way as getting the diagnosis right compared to those hopeless clinicians. But I'm wondering if there's a capacity with legislation or with guidance to, and especially for healthcare providers, might they try and turn the attention of the AI people onto those slightly more nuanced components of healthcare delivery?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that because honestly, a lot of my training has been driven by the fact that I've been a practicing clinical ethicist for my career, and then also work with the machine learning folks. And a lot of my work, as most ethics is, it's within the ICU. It's where there's epistemic uncertainty. There's also ethical uncertainty. And so I totally agree with you. I think that a lot of AI ethics guidelines have kind of bypassed a lot of those very nuanced issues. And it is always hard to kind of provide specific guidance in individual contexts. But I think one of the things that I do find is consistently missed from the AI field is that aspect that you're speaking to, which is that the prediction, sometimes called the decision, that the AI tool makes is only a subset and always will only be a subset of the full clinical context that you might need to take into account in order to effectively treat a patient. And also, as you said, it's not a one and done kind of deal, especially in somewhere like the ICU. This is it's a journey, it's a trajectory. And so without carefully looking at, and making sure that we're cognizant of the fact that that AI output is one component of a larger picture. If we're focusing, so heavily on that one component, we're neglecting that wider picture.
I think there's plenty of opportunities in a hospital setting for that, in particular, and kind of tracking, and because there's lots of, there's data going into the electronic medical record all the time from the patient, either directly from devices in many hospitals or nurse notes or progress notes, etc. So that's the sort of thing we can do. Harder in a community setting where you see the doctor and says contact me if it doesn't improve in 3 days, and so no one contacts them if it does improve, right? So we don't capture that data, and so that's harder. But agree that, and I think we're starting to see broader use of AI across healthcare to be not just about the diagnostic decision. I agree that the sexy bit, but whether it's looking at back-end systems, supply chain, and lots of other places, we are starting to see the health system realise that actually we could save a lot of money if we do actually get AI to or combine this data and do a better job on the back end.
So can I just add on? I think to your point, it almost appears to me that it looks like AI is like a snapshot, and obviously that is not good in clinical practice, because patients normally go through a series of if they have a condition, it could be a chronic or acute condition, but there's recovery or there's sometimes even worsening of their situation. So AI as a snapshot may help the individual physician or surgeon or clinician, but it's important to have that flow of events which could be captured, and perhaps maybe Gen AI could do that, we don't really know. Interestingly, AI has also come into the fore with therapeutics in our field when we sort of perform procedures which are involving removal of cancers endoscopically. AI has the capability in some centers now to sort of tell us what potentially is at the back of an area, could be a vessel which we should not cut. So helping with therapeutics in a certain extent, that's also coming to the fore. So almost superimposing with what could be behind an area in a very enclosed area where we're using a scope. So with regards to therapeutics as well, that's slowly coming into fray. How it pans out and how it works, we really don't know. So diagnostics is one part, but therapeutics is easing its way in.
John, to your question, one of the things that David's point about the 250 million invested into the AI lab in the UK context is the way a lot of that was spent was around technology, as Xiao mentioned, but it was what we missed the opportunity to do was to, as they say, demand signal. We missed the opportunity to say, these are our priority needs, not just priority conditions, but within those conditions, this is where we would like help, and then allow the market to respond to that. So that was an opportunity. If we had our time again, it would look quite different. So, Xiao?
Just to add one thing to that, I think, again, this is not something that's new. We know that diagnostic yield doesn't translate into therapeutic yield. We do test treatment trials, that's why we do that. The difference, I think, with AI is that they're marketed before they have to produce any effectiveness evidence. And we can say that we want that at the pre-regulatory level, but I think with AI, when we think about the effectiveness in terms of outcomes, it's not something that can be pinned on just the algorithm itself, but it's a sum of the algorithm and the way that you integrate it into a health setting and the clinical pathway, as Melissa said. So I'm not convinced that, yes, we can do effectiveness trials prior to implementation, but I think the evidence is more meaningful done at the post-integration level.
Thanks, Xiao. Conscious of time, we'll do is we'll try and take the questions and respond fairly quickly so as we get... Who's next? Okay, just over there, I think. If those who wield the microphones, if you can distribute, because I'm not always being able to keep... Yes, over to you.
Hi, Kaz Thursky, University of Melbourne. My question is around workforce capacity building. So if we assume that we need to have a human in the loop in how we develop the data, extract the data, make sure the data is valid, design the systems, implement them, and undertake the post-market surveillance. I think there's only 200, IADH fellows in Australia. That we've got a real shortage of clinical informaticists and sort of workforce, given the sheer volume of what's coming. What are the recommendations around those of you in that position?
I think one of the things is building workforce capacity within healthcare settings. So, for example, Helen's work at Women's and Children's, building the research capacity within that hospital, training up staff in some of these methods so that we're better able to do this. I think that it has twofold. One, it enables us to do that, but also we do find staff are very excited to take on a different aspect of their work. A lot of people, especially nursing and allied health, a lot of them are quite excited about the idea of bringing another set of skills, of getting involved in a different way to try and improve healthcare systems. So I think that this offers benefits to our workforce, as well as giving us the ability to have that kind of set of core capabilities.
And I'll be very quick. So totally agree, and I totally hear that there's a clinical workforce issue. There is totally a digital health clinical workforce issue too, and I think more universities are upskilling clinicians, nurses, etc., around digital and data and healthcare. But even universities in Australia, I think, have doubled the number of IT graduates over the last 10 years, and none of them teach anything about health. We've partnered with the University of Queensland now over the last 5 years for a third-year IT course around digital health software projects, so they learn all the standards and stuff, and we've got 80 students this year, so we're trying.
I imagine it may come up in the next panel too. I think there's one over there, and then we'll come to this table here.
Yeah, thanks very much. Ginny Barber, I'm from the Medical Journal of Australia. So my question went back to something that you said, Alastair, about that most of these algorithms that are being reported on are static, as opposed to developing. So my question is kind of, what does that mean for the published literature? How do we rely on that? And what does it mean for healthcare practice as well? Because presumably they are constantly evolving, but we're seeing them at a snapshot at a time.
Yeah, no, thanks. Xiao, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, So we don't really have any AI as medical devices that literally constantly live evolve in a sort of way that we don't have oversight over at the moment. We do have AI as medical devices that are updated, and they'll be stamped with version numbers, and they have to go back to the regulators for that. There are downsides to that, because in some ways we're not making use of one of the biggest advantages of this technology. And so regulators have thought quite a lot about this, and there is a model called Predetermined Change Control Plans, PCCP, which has been proposed where, as a manufacturer, what you would do as a company, you would set out what updates you plan to make. And as long as it stays within the scope of what that device is meant to do, then you can do that with a slightly removed level of oversight from the regulators. And that's kind of like a halfway house between, you know, updating all the time versus completely static each time.
And the Therapeutic Goods Association in Australia has adopted that approach as well. So,
yeah, thanks.
Flavia Cicottini. I have a comment. So at the moment, the AI is really neat. The colonoscopy examples, all those diagnostic things are really neat. But there's massive numbers of Australians who have no access to healthcare, rural, regional, Indigenous. And all these things we're doing are going to give more opportunity to the people who can access a colonoscopy, can access ICU, and so on. And in a way, AI should be able to contribute as a disruptor. We now have telehealth, we have good digital stuff being rolled out across the country. Rather than the danger of just spending more and more and more money on fewer and fewer people, which I think is the really big risk. In Australia, we've got an energy transition which is running into trouble because we're using old thinking and old ways to do something new. Maybe, you know, we do all these things. In terms of money, the pharmaceutical companies spend billions to get one drug to market. So when we talk about money in the health system, maybe it's time to also think more broadly.
So
can I
just before we go, this is a really important big question. I hope we'll have time for one more question after this. Apologies for those who have missed out. You'll need to have a microphone. Panel will be all available during the break as well. But yeah, sorry if we run out of time. Right, who's going to take?
That is an exceptional question. And that is a big problem which we face as well. It appears to be that AI is also heading towards people who are obviously would have access to it, and then you have this loop forming with more and more niche sort of people having access to AI, and the rest of the population may not have much access to it. And I think that's something which we have to consider. Given that digital transformation and the availability of the internet and whatnot is becoming more and more prominent with the population, I think some ways to battle that would be to perhaps have some form of a triaging mechanism where patients can access so that they can get access to care with a digital sort of network, if they have access to that is. And then that can help them access care in, let's say, public or private hospitals. That's one way. There's also some work going on with patient-centered AI mechanisms. And I know lunch is coming along the way, but there have also been now apps to look at patients, let's say, who've got inflammatory bowel disease, who've got loose bowel actions, and for them to self-evaluate what they excrete through apps and sending that data on to the clinician to sort of help with letting the patient know if they need to step up their medication or whether they need to come to the hospital to access care. So those sort of things are there in place. But I think we should also look at having more patient-centered AI sort of ideas to put forth out there, so there'll be more and more patients hopefully accessing care with when they really need it. Yes, so I think that's a really good point.
Very fast. Hospitals can address this within how they prioritize their own resources within the hospitals. So if there's the potential to address an underrepresented group or an equity-deserving group, they might get priority in terms of which resources we devote to them. And then if anyone sits on funding bodies, communities building their own tools to address their own needs, we need to be funding them a lot better than we are.
Brilliant. I'm going to go to the last question at the back.
Hi, David Mackey. I've spent a long time looking at optic nerves and diagnosing disease. We can tell zygosity of twin pairs from them. But when in 2018 they said we can tell the sex of a patient from their optic discs, I could not believe that and spent a lot of time trying to teach myself how to do it with my postdoc and failed. So last year, a group in Vancouver's actually managed to do this. But interestingly, the naive observers did better than the expert ophthalmologists in telling sex. How are we going to break open the black box and retrain clinicians with what AI is recognising that we don't see?
Love it. Yeah, anybody want to take that one? Raj, do you want to go?
So your question is how do we train clinicians who are not trained in AI? Is that
no? So just for reasons of time, if it's okay, I will take that one. It's just some really interesting work demonstrating what AI can do that humans can't do, and use the example of identifying sex from retinal images. We actually replicated that study with the Moorfields group as well. So it is a consistent finding. I love the fact that you've also tried to train yourself to do it since then. There's a concept called saliency maps, which are very imperfect. For those who recognise that term, you'll go, oh, they're a bit, imprecise as well. But the idea is that various approaches to try and break open the black box and get the algorithm to show which are the bits of data that it most needed to make that decision. And one of the interesting things, if you look at that original paper and you look at the saliency maps, you see the hotspots of where the difference between male and female seems to sit around the fovea, the kind of very central part of the retina. And that was interesting to me because actually I look after a number of people with eye conditions where there's a really significant male-female split, and you may do the same. And actually, a lot of those focus around differences in the fovea. So that, again, seemed to have biological plausibility. I couldn't look at a retinal scan, though, and tell one from the other, but it's sort of fitting together. But I love that. Right, I think Helen's about to drag us off the stage. So my thanks to the panel. Really interesting conversation. Thanks to all of you for the great questions, and look forward to further discussion. But Helen, see you.
Yeah, look, thank you so much for your time and generosity in being here, all of the panel members, and for Alastair for sharing it. I think we could have gone on for hours. There's still so many questions. But do use the next half hour for the break to grab something to eat and then maybe head out into the sunshine, or there's a little bit of sunshine, and continue those conversations. And we will be back then at 11:50 for the next session. Thank you.